Last year, I had a pretty creepy experience involving a wrong number, or at least that's what I thought it was. Randomly one time, I got a text from a number that I didn't know simply saying, "Hey." I wasn't sure who it was, so I said, "Hey, who's this? I don't have this number saved." The person responded saying, "Hey Mark, meet me." My name is not Mark, so I knew that it was a wrong number. I responded saying that I was not Mark and they must have the wrong number. Very soon after, I got another text. They said, "Okay, who are you?" I realized then that it was probably a scam and they were trying to get my information. I heard about some of these sort of text scams and had gotten one once before. Most of the time, if somebody actually has the wrong number, they will just say, "My bad, wrong number," and then not text again. They wouldn't be very interested in you, but only interested in the actual number they're trying to reach. So when they asked who I was, I didn't respond. But surprising to me, they texted again a while later. This time they texted saying, "Answer me." This was strange, but I still thought that it was a scam. I responded and said, "I'm not falling for your scam." I thought then that they wouldn't respond to me, but I was wrong. Just moments after I sent the text, they tried FaceTiming me. At first, I didn't answer it. I thought that it was too weird, and I was not expecting it at all. But after I didn't pick up, when I did, it was hard to see at first who was on the other end. But after looking, it appeared to be somebody who was in a very dark, unfinished basement. I couldn't make out the details of their face because it was too dark and sort of blurry. The quality wasn't the greatest either, but I could tell that it appeared to be a man, and he started talking in an extremely deep voice. The voice did not sound natural, like he was trying to fake it. As he spoke, I couldn't make out any of the words that he was saying either. He was sort of mumbling, and it didn't make any sense. I said nothing because I had no idea what to possibly say. I just sat there watching him in shock. He continued to move around the dark basement and ramble incoherently in that creepy deep voice. He went on for about a minute or two, and I couldn't take it anymore. I ended the call, and then I blocked the number right then and there. It was really strange. After that, I didn't get any other weird texts or calls. Looking back at it now, I still have no clue who that was. I'm not sure why they texted me or called me. It was not the scam like I thought it was. But what was it? I'm still trying to figure that out. This happened a long time ago. Back then, I lived in an apartment by myself. This would have been sometime in the early 2000s. So I was trying to call my friend one night on the home phone in my apartment. I had her number written down and had almost memorized it. My phone was kind of old and I didn't have caller ID or many modern functions. That wasn't a big deal to me though. So anyways, as I was dialing my friend, I must have dialed the wrong number because when the call got picked up, I heard a man's voice. I knew that my friend lived alone like I did. Still, I asked if she was there, and the guy said that nobody by that name lived there. So I said that I was sorry and I must have dialed the wrong number. The man said he understood and it was okay. Then I hung up. I dialed again for my friend, and this time made sure to dial each number correctly. When the call went through, I got my friend and then I started talking to her. We were best friends and we talked on the phone almost every day, many times for hours. So when we were talking, I remember that I heard another call coming in, but I didn't bother to hang up and answer it. I talked with my friend for about an hour and then hung up. After that, it was sometime at night, maybe 9 o'clock or so. I got another call on my phone and picked it up. I heard a man on the other end and realized that it was the same guy who I had accidentally called earlier. He said hi and that he tried to call me before. I told him that the line had been busy. He said that after I called him, I sounded cute and asked if I wanted to go on a date with him sometime. He also said that based on my area code, he figured that we lived in the same city. I realized that the guy must have had caller ID. To me, this did not seem like a good idea. For one, his voice didn't sound very attractive to me, but also, for me being a young woman, I didn't think it was smart to go on a random blind date with a guy who I accidentally called the wrong number. I told him that I just didn't want to, and it was nothing personal, but I didn't know him. He tried to convince me, but I really didn't want to, and I was finding it to be increasingly awkward. Finally, the guy said he understood and then hung up. But apparently, he did not in fact understand, because he called me back like 10 minutes later. I answered because again, I didn't have caller ID, and I didn't know who it was that was calling me. When I answered the phone, he asked if I had changed my mind yet. I said no, it's been like 10 minutes. He said that he just thought he would ask, and I said, okay, goodbye now, and then I hung up the phone. Then I called my friend again, because I just had to tell her about the crazy thing that had happened. For the rest of the night, the man did not call. The next day, I was at work during the day like usual. I got back to my apartment and was having a normal night with no strange phone calls or anything. But at about 8 o'clock, there was a knock on my apartment door. I didn't know who it would be because I wasn't expecting anyone, and I wasn't thinking about the man in the moment who had called me previously. When I looked through the peephole, I saw a guy standing there. He just had a creepy look to him and gave me a bad feeling, and I'm not just saying that. I had not remembered the phone calls in that moment. I was about to answer the door when I saw the guy reach into his pocket. I was curious, so I kept watching. He took out a cell phone and then started dialing a number. Moments later, my phone rang. That's when I realized who it was. I walked over to my phone, and for some reason, I answered. The guy asked me if I was at home, and I said, "What's it to you?" The man told me to open my front door. That's when I knew for a fact who it was, and I told him to go away. He said that I should go out with him and give him a chance. I told him that if he didn't go away now, I was calling the cops. He got offended and then finally hung up the phone. I went to the peephole again thinking that he had left, but he hadn't. He was still there. Then he loudly banged on the door. I still didn't open it. He yelled at me, demanding that I let him in, but I still wouldn't do it. By this point, I was about to call the cops, but he finally turned and stormed off. That's when I looked out of the door again for a while and made sure that he had gone. And after he was out of sight, I looked out into the hallway just to make sure that he was actually gone. He was. I was extremely creeped out by the guy. I don't know how he knew exactly where I lived. I think that maybe he looked me up in the phone book. It was a very scary experience, though. For 1 year when I was in middle school, I did homeschool. It was mostly just online, so it was pretty much like online classes for college, except there wasn't really a teacher. It was all done on this computer program and on the internet. So every day for school, I would just sit in my room at my desk and computer and do school there. Overall, it wasn't too bad, but I didn't really leave the house much. When I wasn't doing school, I would stay on my computer and usually play video games there as well. And the next day, I remember that I did my school again like normal. After that, I played video games, and I remember that I stayed up late playing on my computer after my parents had gone to bed. But during this time, at probably after midnight, I got another email. It was from the same school email that I had received the night prior. This one had no words, but just a photo that was attached. The picture was of my house at night, taken from the street. I was so confused and also creeped out. It was very strange. I looked at the picture for like 5 minutes straight, wondering what was going on. Then I went over and looked out of my bedroom window. I did notice that there was a car parked on the side of the road just past our house. The engine was off, and I couldn't tell if anybody was inside or not because it was too dark, but it usually was not there. Most of the time, cars did not randomly park on the side of our street. I was really freaked out. I went back to the email and just kept looking at it. Then I realized something. This was not the official email address from my school. They had the same name and same logo, but the email for this was one letter off, which is why it was hard to see at a glance. This was somebody pretending to be my school. I had no idea who would do this or why though. It wouldn't be one of my friends messing with me or something like that, because I wasn't even old enough to drive and neither were any of my friends. This was so strange. I went back over and looked out of the window again. The car was still there. I thought about waking up my parents, but didn't. I went back to the email and blocked the account. Then I just hoped that nothing crazy would happen. I went around the house and made sure that every door was locked, which it was. Then I made sure that every window was completely covered. A few were not, and I covered them. After that, I went back to my room. I checked out of my window again, and the car was still there. After that, I stayed at my computer playing video games to try to get myself to calm down. Eventually, I did. It was probably close to 3 a.m. by the time I was able to fall asleep. When I woke up the next morning, I checked the window and the car was gone. I also checked my email and did not receive anything else strange. I went around the house and there was no signs of a break-in or anything, so everything was all good. After that, I wondered about it for a few days, but nothing else happened. I only did that school for that 1 year, and nothing else strange like that ever happened again. I still wonder who did it. And was that car on the street whoever took the picture? I mean, somebody had to know that I did that school program, and then they would have had to pretend to be them to get me to fill out the form for my address. But for what purpose? Just to creep me out with that picture? I'm really glad that nothing else happened. This happened just a couple of months ago. It was the weekend and I was up late watching TV. I was in the living room of my apartment and relaxing after a long day of work. My apartment is not that big. It's basically one giant room with a kitchen at the front by the door and then the living room past that. I think that's a pretty standard setup. Then there's one bathroom and one bedroom off of that down the tiny hallway. So as I sat there feeling relaxed and having an ice-cold drink, I suddenly heard a knock at my apartment door. I didn't know who would possibly be there because I obviously was not expecting anybody. I looked over to the door but did not bother to get up. I figured that it was probably a mistake. Maybe somebody was trying to go to another apartment. After maybe 20 seconds, they knocked again. Then I heard a younger man's voice say, "DoorDash." Now, I did not order anything on DoorDash. In my mind, this was a simple mistake. One of my neighbors must have ordered food, and the delivery guy simply had his address mistaken. So I got up from the couch and started walking over to the door. My plan was to just tell the guy that he had the wrong place and to double check the address. When I got to the door, I opened it. But as soon as I did, I saw that there was not just one guy there, but there was 3 men. They were all dressed in dark clothing and had sweatshirts and jackets with hoods up. My door was open for literally half a second, and as soon as I started to open it, I thought better of it and began to close it. The main guy right at the door then went forward and tried to stop me, but he must have realized that he would have gotten the door slammed on his arm because he almost reached in and then didn't. After I slammed my door shut, I very quickly locked it. Pretty much the next second, the guy tried to open the door. Then I heard the other 2 guys get closer. They kept trying to open the door and then they started banging on it and kicking it as well. It was really loud and I thought that the door might break. So I quickly ran into the other room and then I got my phone and dialed 911. But the guys banging and trying to break in did not last long, because within probably a minute it stopped. Then I heard them all running away down the hallway. I told the police what was going on and they said they would have an officer there shortly. And the cops arrived pretty quick. It was probably within like 5 minutes. However, by that time the men were all gone. I'm not sure where they went, but they were no longer in the apartment complex. I assumed that it was an attempted robbery, but I don't know why they picked me. My apartment is just like all the others. I'm not rich or anything, so maybe it was just random. I'm just glad that I had fast instincts to close the door as soon as I had opened it, or else I think they might have barged their way in.
I live in a small country where things still go bump in the night. And that doesn't go for just creepy local legends. Dark strangers, cartels, I think you get the idea. Where I live, nowhere is truly removed from the day-to-day dangers of the unknown. It was a dark night. I found myself home alone. Here, it isn't uncommon for the entire family to live together. Grandparents, parents, children, grandchildren will all share a growing piece of property for wealth and security. It's the simplest way to live. But as you can imagine, being home alone is a rarity. With so many people under one roof, it's almost impossible to time anything just right to ever be actually alone. So I did what I always do. I hooked up the surround sound throughout the living room and turned out all the lights. I bundled up on the couch with my favorite snack and watched whatever I desired on the big family television. Despite the ever-present danger I mentioned earlier, I remember the evening being quite relaxing. Rain and a breeze moved in along the coast and created a pitter-patter against the roof. As the night went on, I thought I heard someone at the front door. As I moved to investigate, the sound and movement stopped. But being a stormy night, and that I had the sound up so loud, I truly in my heart believed I'd simply heard something that wasn't there. I turned back to the movie and did my best to relax. That's when the back door began to rattle. I adjust myself on the sofa to get a better look. When someone starts to knock, a frantic, heavy banging against the hard wood. I froze in place. Whatever I dismissed as storm sounds, or maybe just the junk blowing around in the backyard, is now undeniable. There's someone trying to come inside the house. Everyone who lives there naturally has a key. Whoever is outside the door clearly does not. At the time, I'm an 18-year-old man. I'm running through the logical scenarios in my head. Whoever this is, they tried to open up the front door, then slip around the side of the house and is now trying to force the back door open. This isn't cartel or a monster. Anything with real bloodlust would have forced the front door open. I reasoned that it's a common thief, probably someone very nervous and trying to remain unseen. Being 18, I decided to take them head on and show the world this asshole picked the wrong house. I moved from the couch to the kitchen, grabbed the biggest cleaver I can find. 10 inches of dingy, ugly steel. Still, the door handle is twisting back and forth. Go time. I have no idea what's going to happen, but I'm down for whatever. There's nothing like the mentality of a teenager. You don't know who you're messing with, I shouted through the door. The stranger on the other side stopped shaking the handle for a moment. I know you're out there. You have 3 seconds to get the out of here, or I'll cut you up. They didn't care. The knocking started again, even harder than before. My confidence quickly faded. I took a deep breath and readied myself. In my head, this was do or die. Hoisting the cleaver over my head, I unfastened the bolt and threw open the door before me. It wasn't a burglar or a gangster of any kind. It was my sweet little grandma. She stood there soaking wet with an expression of agitation, but also unmistakable terror. "What are you doing?" she shouted at me. "Me? What are you doing at the back door?" I asked. "I thought you were an intruder." No. She laughed as she stepped inside the house. I went and paused the television while she shed her coats by the door. She explained that she'd gotten home during the storm, tried knocking for a while. That was the noise I heard at the front door. I guess she knocked for quite a while because she finally gave up and decided to try the back door. The front entrance has a little cover, so she figured that even if it were locked, at least she would be out of the rain. That's when I started to hear the commotion and decided to go to war with whatever was outside. Glad I didn't though, because I seriously almost killed my grandma.
This happened just last summer. I live by myself in what I would describe as a typical apartment. I have one bedroom, a bathroom, kitchen, and living room pretty much. It's inside of a building in a fairly large apartment complex. So one night, I worked sort of late into the night at my job. I was really tired from the long day and pretty much just arrived home, took a quick shower, and went to bed. That was around midnight. However, I woke up at roughly 4 o'clock in the morning. Obviously, I wanted to get more sleep, but I was wide awake. I was also very thirsty and felt dehydrated. Sometimes, mostly in the summer, I wake up in the night because of dehydration, and obviously on this night I had worked late and not been able to drink as much. Then usually I drink some water and feel better immediately and then go right back to sleep. But some of the times when I wake up, I'm wide awake and can't go back to sleep right away. And this was one of those times. So what I usually do when that happens is get up and go into the living room and watch TV until I get sleepy again. That might be 15 or 30 minutes usually. So that was what I did on this night. I got out of bed, drank some water, immediately felt better, and then sat on the couch and turned on the TV. My couch is to the right of the front door to the apartment, about 20 feet away. I remember that when I sat down, I glanced over and happened to notice that my door was actually unlocked. I realized that I somehow had forgotten to lock it. Normally, I always remember, but I guess I forget sometimes. I went over and locked the door and then went back to the couch. I started watching TV and waited for myself to feel sleepy again. I was flipping around the channels for maybe 5 minutes when suddenly I heard a noise. Obviously, it was very quiet other than the noise from the TV, but the sound I heard was somebody trying to open the front door to my apartment. I really couldn't believe it, and I had no idea who it could be. I sat and listened, but didn't hear anything else. Then, after a moment, I got up and I walked over to the door. I looked out of the peephole, but nobody was there. Then I opened up my apartment door and looked into the hallway. That's when I saw him. There was a man wearing a hooded sweatshirt walking away from me down the hallway. He was mostly looking down at the ground, and then he went to another door and tried opening it, but this one was also locked. I watched him go to another door and try that one as well. Apparently, he hadn't noticed me opening the door. I didn't know who this guy was, but he was seemingly trying to get into any apartment. As he reached the end of the hallway, he suddenly looked behind him and then he saw me. When he did, I quickly closed the door. I was afraid that he would come back, but he didn't. Soon after, I went back to bed. I'm really glad that I woke up when I did that night and locked my door, or who knows what could have happened. I work at Starbucks, and something happened a few weeks ago that really freaked me out. For a little background, I'm an 18-year-old female and have worked at Starbucks for about 6 months. So I was working until close one day, and I was behind the counter making drinks for most of the time. For much of the shift, I was kept pretty busy. I didn't really notice many of the people that would be sitting around inside. Our location is large enough that there's a good amount of tables and seats. It's fairly popular for people to bring their laptops and work and things like that. At one point, I noticed a few of the people sitting around. One of them was this guy sitting alone at a table on his laptop. He was probably about middle-aged, had dark hair, and was wearing a blue jacket. When I noticed him, he was staring at me. He didn't look away though when I saw him. I had to look away because it was weird. But then I just kept working and I didn't think about the guy or look over in his direction anymore. Hours later though, when things quieted down significantly, I was not quite as busy. At that point, I noticed the very few people that were still inside. I think there were just 2 or 3 people sitting around. One of them was the same guy from earlier, and when I noticed him, he was staring at me again and once more did not look away. It was almost unsettling how weird it seemed to me. I also thought that it was weird at first how he had been there for so long, but I guessed it wasn't that strange for people to work all day in a coffee shop after all. As we approached closing time, it was now just me and another coworker. The other customers soon left, but the man remained. The closer it got to closing time, the more nervous I was. Was he just going to keep sitting here past close? Thankfully, with about 5 minutes left before we closed for the night, I saw him getting up to leave. Then he walked out the door, and I felt better. I stayed for a while longer until I was good to go. After I left work, I just drove straight home that night. The Starbucks is in an area with lots of other stores and restaurants right nearby, and it's always kind of busy over there. I live with my parents at their house, which is about a 10-minute drive from the Starbucks. So I drove home and then went inside. It was probably like 9 p.m. by that point. I just remember that maybe about 10 minutes or so after getting back, I noticed this car parked on the side of the street outside. It was pretty much across from our house and the engine of the car was running. What was strange is that it's pretty unusual for cars to be parked on the side of our street. It's not really in the city and everybody has large driveways. I saw the lights to the car turn off and I just decided to go over to the window and look at it. When I got closer, I noticed that there was somebody inside the driver's seat. It looked just like the same guy who had been at the Starbucks staring at me. At first, I thought that I was paranoid thinking about the guy and there was no way that it was really him. But then he looked over at the house. I saw him for like a second, and then I quickly ducked down so that he wouldn't see me. I realized in that moment that it was for sure the same guy. This kind of freaked me out, because of course I wondered if he had somehow followed me home or something. I went away from the window, and I didn't want him to see me or anything. But a short time later, my curiosity got the better of me, and I went back. Not only was the car still there, but the man was still in the driver's seat and appeared to be looking at me. I moved away from the window again and found my dad, who was thankfully still up. He decided to go outside and confront the man. However, as soon as my dad left the house and began to walk towards the car, it quickly drove away. I figured that was pretty incriminating and that he probably wasn't just there because he was lost or something. Since then, I have not seen the man, not in my neighborhood and not at Starbucks, and I'm really happy about that. I'm hoping that I never see him again. I live alone in a house that I'm renting in a fairly average neighborhood. I moved here last year and something really crazy happened shortly after. So it all started one day when I noticed this car parked a ways down the street. It was across from my house and a little ways down. It sort of stood out because it was a red car, so it got my attention. I went outside to get my mail at the end of the driveway, and I remember that as I did, I noticed that there was a man in the driver's seat of the red car. I found that strange because I had noticed the car out there like an hour earlier, so had he just been sitting in the car the whole time? When I saw the guy, he was not looking at me, but looking down at, I'm guessing, his phone. I just casually turned around and then walked back inside of my house. It didn't seem like too big of a deal to me or anything. So, as it got later, the sun started to set. I was passing by the front of the house, and I noticed the red car was still there. But also, I could see that the man was still in the driver's seat, and then I saw that his driver's window was down and he appeared to be taking a picture of my house or something. His phone was out and sort of pointed in my direction. I didn't think that he could see me or anything, but I moved away just in case. Several minutes later, when I looked, he was finally gone. It was a pretty weird thing, but he was gone now, so I figured that was that. As strange as it might be, I just hoped that he would never return. But I was wrong. 2 nights later, I was at home by myself, and it was much later at night now. I didn't have work the next day, so I was staying up pretty late. I was in my bedroom, and I heard the sound of a loud bang coming from the back door. I got up and was instantly thinking that someone was trying to break in. After leaving my bedroom, I started to head towards the back door, but slowed down. I heard another loud bang and looked around to see if I had any kind of a weapon. I really didn't though. Maybe I am unprepared, but I just never thought that somebody would try to break into my house. I then heard whoever it was trying to open the back door to the house. Thankfully, it was locked. I went over and looked out of a window. I just barely saw what looked like a man there, but I couldn't really make out any details. Everything was happening so fast. For some reason, I did not call the police right away. Looking back, I don't know why. You would think that would be the first thing to go through my mind in that situation, but I guess you never know how you will react in certain situations until you get in them. So anyways, there I was at the back door with some guy trying to get in. I got this crazy spontaneous idea and took out my phone. No, I still did not dial 911. Instead, I went to YouTube and looked up a really loud and annoying alarm sound. I clicked on the first video, and thankfully I forgot to turn my volume up because an ad started playing. Then I skipped the ad and turned my volume all the way up and hit play. The annoying alarm started blaring, and thankfully it worked. The guy at my back door stopped trying to break in and he moved away. He then went back around the front and left my property. Then, after I calmed down a little, I finally came to my senses and dialed the police. They came out and looked around and saw some slight damage to my back door. I filled out a report and then the police left and said they would look around for the man. However, he was never found to my knowledge. I believe that it was the same man who I had seen days prior. I don't know for sure, but those two suspicious situations seem to be linked to me. Thankfully, nothing like that has happened since. About 25 years ago, I used to work at a gas station. It was one that was somewhat off a country road and only like 5 minutes from where I lived. I would work the overnight shift because the station was open 24 hours. This is something that was both creepy and easy typically. There wasn't a whole lot that had to be done overnight. The store part of the gas station was pretty small. It had a good amount of snacks and drinks, so I would do some stocking of the shelves and organizing here and there. Most of the time, though, I would just sit behind the counter. We had this TV that was hanging from the ceiling in the corner that I used to watch at a really low volume. Without that, I would have been truly bored out of my mind most nights. But the TV was amazing, because this was before smartphones, so I couldn't just go online or whatever. During the day, a lot of people would drive on the road that the gas station was on, and they would stop. At night, though, it was kind of the opposite. We would seldom get any customers. An occasional car would drive by and sometimes stop in for fuel, but normally if they did, they wouldn't come inside of the store. In fact, the gas station stopped being open 24/7 sometime in the late 2000s, and about 5 years ago it was converted into a smoke and vape shop. But back to the story. To be honest, when people did stop there at night, I always hoped that they wouldn't come inside, because being by myself in the middle of the night, whenever anybody came in, it always seemed kind of sketchy. There were a few strange people, but overall not that many scary experiences. One really stands out though. It was a night like any other. The time was roughly 2 o'clock in the morning, so this was among the quietest times of night for me. I was just sitting behind the counter and looking around the empty shop. To my right was the door to go inside, as well as 2 very large windows looking out to the gas pumps. Surrounding the station all around was pretty much wildlife. There was a dense woods right across the street, and next to the property was some tall grass and quite a bit of trees scattered around as well. We hadn't had any customers in the gas station in well over an hour. I don't think that I had seen a car in a long time either. I remember glancing out of the windows though and noticing what appeared to be a man. He was walking slowly from the sort of wooded field area next to the gas station and making his way towards the gas pumps. It was really strange to see because there was no real place that he would be coming from. After making his way to the pavement, he just kind of started standing around for a while. It was very strange. I kept watching him because I was very curious as to where he had come from and what he was doing. The man was bald, looked to be maybe in his 40s or so, and had a slight beard on his chin, I remember. He was also wearing sunglasses. After standing around and looking the other way mostly for like 2 or 3 minutes, he started to walk towards the gas station. I thought at that point that he was going to go inside. He walked all the way towards the doors. Then the man stopped, took out a cigarette, and started smoking it. He did not go inside the store. After smoking for a couple minutes, he then started walking away and crossed the quiet street. Then the guy literally walked right into the woods, which had me really puzzled. It was very strange because there was no path to go into the woods or anything. It was just like dense forest all around. That alone was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. But it got weirder. So maybe 30 minutes later, we still hadn't had any more customers. Out of nowhere, I saw movement outside and I looked up. I was just on time to see the same man emerging from the woods. After that, he walked across the street and back onto our property. This time though, he walked all the way to the front door and actually went inside. When he was in the shop, he started walking for the counter. I said hi to him, and the man said that he needed $1,500. I had a bad feeling when he said that, but hoped that I was misunderstanding him. I asked what he meant. The man then demanded that I give him $1,500. His voice was now angry. I looked at him, and he wasn't holding any kind of a weapon or anything, but he was leaning in fairly close. I didn't know if he had one on him, but I always kept a bottle of pepper spray just behind the counter in case. When the man demanded it again, he leaned towards me even closer and shouted. That's when I took the pepper spray, pointed it right at his face, and let it rip. The man was instantly blinded by it and moved backwards. He grabbed his eyes, and I yelled at him to get out of the store and that I was calling the police. The man backed away and thankfully left. When he got outside, he walked around covering his face, then crossed the street again and went back into the woods. It was very weird. I kept an eye out for the rest of my shift, but I didn't see the guy again. In fact, I never saw him for the rest of the time that I worked there. It was one of the weirdest situations I've ever had. Several years ago, I worked a temporary job as a part-time security guard. It was a job that I was not really qualified for, but I guess there wasn't really any requirements. There was this building in the sort of downtown area of the city that I lived in. The building was a mix of some offices and some other businesses. It went up several stories and connected to other buildings as well. During the day, the building was open and there would be somebody who worked at the main desk. Many people would walk through the building during the day, but at night it was closed, and for some reason they still needed a security guard. I would literally just sit in the desk all night and do nothing. Nobody ever came to the building, and I never had to talk to anyone. I wore a security guard uniform that was similar to a cop's outfit, but I was certainly no cop, not even close. The only training I got really was to call the cops if anything happened. But on the other hand, I could just sit down and go on my phone for hours and get paid for it. I could play games and watch YouTube videos and do whatever I wanted really. I would also walk around the lobby area and some of the connecting hallways to get my steps in. I didn't mind the job much because it was just part-time, so it didn't really get old. Anyways, one night I was working, and by this point it was probably after midnight. I know that I was at my desk like usual when somebody knocked on the door. This was something that had never happened before. There were 2 glass doors that were at the main entrance. Obviously they were locked now. I wasn't really sure why somebody would be knocking on the doors, but I felt like it was my job to go and check. They also tried to open the doors as I got up, so I walked over to see who was there. When I arrived, I saw a relatively young woman standing there outside. It was a fairly cold night and a little rainy as well. By this time, really nobody else was out walking on the sidewalks or streets. When I got to the door, she was motioning for me to open it. I knew that I was to never let anybody in the building after close, so I tried to tell her through the glass that we were closed and she could not come in. She didn't seem to get it though, and motioned that she could not hear me and for me to open the door again. So reluctantly, I did. I opened the door just a small amount, and I told the woman that the building was closed. She said something like she was very cold and needed to use the restroom quick. I told her that the building was off limits, and I gave her directions to a building nearby that was actually open. She did not seem satisfied, but accepted what I said and started to walk away. Then I closed the door and went back over to my desk. That was the first time that anybody had ever come to the door while I was working. In fact, it was the first time that I had ever interacted with anybody at the job. However, not more than 20 minutes later, I heard a knocking at the door again. This was really weird, but then I figured that it was probably the same woman there again for some reason. I walked over and saw that there was now a man standing right outside the door. He had a hooded sweater on, but that didn't seem very suspicious because the weather would call for that. The man knocked again and waved me over. I walked over to him, and then without really giving it a second thought, I opened the door a crack. I was going to tell him the same thing that I told the woman. However, literally the second that I opened the door, the man barged his way in, pushing the door into me. Then he pushed me over, knocking me to the ground. Before the door swung back and closed, another man forced his way inside and stepped over me as I was on the ground now. I did not have any weapons, and I wasn't getting paid enough to stand there and fight the guys. So I got up and quickly ran out the door and left the building. The men were now both inside to do who knows what. I ran a safe distance away and I called the police. I walked around the sidewalks, freezing cold, hoping that the men didn't come after me or anything. Soon though, the police got there and I flagged them down. 3 cars with a total of 5 officers arrived on scene, and some stayed and talked with me while others entered the building. And thankfully they were able to apprehend the 2 men who were still inside the building. They also tracked down that same woman who I had talked to earlier. Apparently she was the getaway driver for the men and was in on it, which made sense. After that I went back to work, but quit a short time after. That was a little too much action for me. I'm still mad at myself for opening the door and letting the guys in. I had just talked to the woman and that had gone fine though, so I wasn't really thinking. I guess maybe their original plan was to try to get her in the building. When that didn't work, they decided to go in by force. When I was in college during my junior year, I lived in a house with another guy. His name was Sam, and we had met the year prior in a class project. I had a good amount of friends in college, but I wasn't able to find a good living situation, because for a while I didn't know if I was going to be transferring schools or staying. I ended up staying, which I was happy about, but I was kind of late to find a place for the following year. It was pretty much a situation where I would have to live in the dorms again. But then the guy I had a class with kind of randomly asked me if I knew where I was living, and I said no. So he told me that he needed a roommate for a house that he was living in. I pretty much said yes right away. I felt like I had gotten lucky at the situation, and I didn't know Sam very well other than the class that we had together. We had never hung out or anything, but I figured that it would be fine. So the house was pretty small and old, but other than that it was better than the dorms. It had an upstairs with 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. Then downstairs was another bathroom, a kitchen, living room, and a dining room. After moving in, things started out fine. I didn't really do much with Sam, we mostly kept to ourselves, but I didn't have a problem with him at all, and he was cool. However, several months into living there, some strange things started happening. One night, I remembered that I heard a door keep opening and closing downstairs. It was really weird. It was like it kept opening and then closing right away, non-stop. It creeped me out, so I got out of bed and went to look. By the time I got downstairs though, nobody was there. It was so weird. I went back upstairs and Sam's door was closed, so I assumed he was asleep. I didn't know how to explain the noise, but I was able to go back to bed a while later. Now, like a week or so after that, I remember that I was woken up to the sound of somebody knocking on my bedroom door. I thought that it had to be Sam, obviously. After waking up, I asked what he wanted, but he didn't answer me. I got up and went over to the door and opened it, but nobody was there. It was really strange. Then, later on, one time when I was doing homework late at night, I heard footsteps downstairs. I assumed that it was Sam, but then he texted me asking if I was downstairs. When I said no, he said that he heard someone down there. I did as well, and it really creeped me out. So I remember that we both went downstairs and looked all around, but didn't find anyone. It was really strange, and we even considered calling the police, but decided not to. So some really weird things had been happening around the house. I talked with Sam for a while about it, and he claimed that he had heard some strange things too. Then things got even worse. One night I heard a loud banging on my bedroom door. It was like somebody was trying to break the door down. I didn't want to open it, but it wasn't locked or anything. After it stopped, things went quiet for a while. Then I finally went over and looked. When I opened the door, nobody was there. It was very strange how all these weird things were happening. I didn't even want to live in the house anymore. Then, one night shortly after that, I got added on Snapchat by a guy from our school. I knew him because he was friends with Sam, but I wasn't really friends with him. After adding him back, he texted me and asked me if strange things were happening in our house, and I said yes. The guy then told me that it was all Sam. He said that Sam had told him how he pretends to make the house all scary. He said he did that because he thought it was funny and he didn't like me, and he also hoped that I would get scared and move out. Apparently, this guy had had a falling out with Sam for some reason, and they were not friends anymore. So now this guy wanted me to know the truth. He also said that he had even helped Sam once. I think it was the time when we both heard somebody downstairs. Anyways, I was shocked to hear it, and I wasn't sure if I should feel better or worse about this. I decided to confront Sam about it the next day. At first, he denied it, and then he tried to play it off as a joke. We argued briefly, and then we went our separate ways. For the rest of the time that I lived there, I barely spoke to Sam at all, but also nothing else strange happened. I live alone in a small house that I rent, and this happened just a few weeks ago. So one night I was watching TV by myself in the living room. I was sitting on the couch and just having a relaxing night. For some context, the living room is at the front end of my house. My couch is against the large living room window which looks out to the front yard. So as I sat on the couch, the window was directly behind me. It's a very long window that stretches across much of the room. There are curtains on each side that can be closed, but to be honest, I'm too lazy to close them most of the time. So when I go to bed, I just shut the lights off. So there I was, sitting on the living room couch and watching television. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking coming from right behind me. Somebody was knocking on my window. It really startled me, and I quickly looked back. When I did, I saw this man standing there in the bushes. He was right on the other side of the glass, like 3 feet away from my head. The man was wearing a sweatshirt and a jacket as well. Both hoods were up far, covering most of his face. It was a kind of rainy night, but this still looked super suspicious. I really couldn't see the guy's face at all. Plus, it was really dark out there. The more suspicious thing, though, was that he was standing in my bushes and knocking on my living room window. My house was not super close to the street either. You would have to walk through the whole front yard to get to it. After seeing the guy, I got up from the couch quickly to put some distance between us. I moved back to the edge of the living room. However, the man did not move. The guy still stood there looking at me, but also sort of looking down kind of. He didn't wave or say anything. I kept watching him, and he kept seemingly watching me. After probably a minute or two, I yelled at him. I asked him what he was doing. At first, the guy did nothing. He didn't answer me. He didn't even really react. Then, he moved away from the window to the side, going out of my view. It did not appear as though he was going off my property, but just to another area of the house. I moved out of the living room to try to figure out where he went. He had gone in the direction of my bedroom, so I went there and looked out of the window, but I didn't see him. Then I went around my house looking out of every window. I didn't see the man anywhere. It was possible that he had left my property, and I was hoping that was the case. My front and backyards are not that big, but I do have some trees and bushes. Plus, there really isn't much lighting at all, so I couldn't really see. I went around looking out of the windows from all angles. I went into the kitchen to look into the backyard, and I still didn't see the guy. So I decided to go outside to look. I wasn't trying to hunt him down or anything. I just wanted to verify that he was off my property and the vicinity for my own peace of mind. So I went out the front door and then walked around my house looking. I didn't see the guy at all, and I felt fairly confident that he was gone by now. What that was all about, I didn't know, but I went back inside and tried to relax again before bed. It was pretty late by now, and I had been planning on going to bed pretty soon anyways. I was up in the living room for a little while longer and nothing happened, so I went to bed. However, I found it very hard to get to sleep. I wasn't tired anymore, and I was feeling paranoid from the strange man at my window. I laid there in bed for probably 30 minutes trying to fall asleep. Then, as I was laying there, I heard the sound of somebody loudly trying to enter my back door. Thankfully, it was locked. I got up and I started turning on all the lights in my house. I also called the cops. Then I started looking out of all the windows. I didn't see anything. I'm guessing that it was the same guy, but he was gone now. When the police got there, I told them about what happened. I gave them a description and they said that they would look around. But after searching my property and the immediate area, they didn't locate him. He hasn't been back since, and I'm hoping that I never see that guy again.
Between 8th to 10th grade, I was deeply involved in a small Minecraft building server. The average age of the players was probably 15 to 17 years old, and we Skyped almost every day for hours. We quickly grew close and would follow each other on other social media platforms. I became really close with one member in particular. His name was Peter. He was in the same grade as me, and I heard rumors that he might have had a crush on me. Rumors that he denied. I found the idea laughable, since we only knew each other online. We were in the same grade, but not in the same school, so I brushed it off, and things were okay for a while. But eventually something felt off. During our conversations, I started catching him in small lies, which bothered me. Deciding it was time to distance myself, I stopped talking to him. A few months later, after no contact, Peter texted me out of the blue. He said that he might transfer to my high school to qualify for an in-state college tuition. His plan was to live alone and support himself while still in high school. My stomach dropped. This felt very wrong and out of nowhere. Still trying to stay calm, I told him that his plan was absolutely insane and pointed out how oddly convenient it was that he just happened to choose the school that I attended. but he insisted that this was a coincidence and that his plan would work. I really hoped that he was bluffing, just messing around. But a short time later, he claimed that he had already purchased plane tickets to visit my high school and stay in my town. Fear washed over me as I realized that Peter was serious and had an unhealthy attachment to me. He wasn't bluffing. To my horror, he posted a Snapchat photo from the airport. He asked me to meet up while he was in town, but I denied. Later on, his Snapchat account showed him touring my high school, taking videos and pictures, likely hoping that I would see them. Fortunately, I was home with pneumonia that day and didn't have to face him. Over the next few days, I was on edge, terrified that he would show up at my door. Luckily, he never figured out where I lived, and eventually he flew back home, abandoning his plan. Shockingly, the rest of our online group never thought his behavior was creepy. I felt like I was going crazy for finding it severely disturbing. I hoped my rejection of the meetup and continued silence would end things. But 2 years later, after I committed to my dream college, Peter popped up again. I had, foolishly, kept following him on social media to monitor if he was ever near me. Then I saw it, a photo of him posing in front of my college's library, captioned, "Transferring here is definitely the move." I don't know if he ever did, but I never ran into him on campus. A few months later, he found out that I had a boyfriend and contacted me on Skype for the first time in 2 years. "Do you think he's going to protect you?" Out of fear, I blocked him and unfollowed him on all social media. I admit that I made mistakes back then. I was young, scared, and surrounded by people telling me this wasn't a big deal. He hasn't tried to contact me since, but that doesn't mean he isn't still watching me. Back in 2014, I joined a Facebook group that was started specifically for people who are from the town I grew up in Southern California. The whole group shared memories of the town, and everyone seemed nice, except for one person. There's always at least one asshole. This guy got on the bad side of one of the admins, whose name was Robert, and ended up being booted from the group. I'll note that I was in my mid-30s at the time, and most of the members were at least 20 years older than me. Robert was approaching 60 and was married with children who were about my age. Robert took a liking to me. Since he was married, I didn't think his friendship would go any further than that, but I was mistaken. He said that I was a down-to-earth girl and was easy to talk to. He and I exchanged phone numbers, and he would message me quite a bit. However, Robert took it a step further and found out where I lived, my landline number, and my mother's address in California. He had a subscription to one of those sites that contain information on people, their age, phone numbers, possible relatives, previous addresses, etc. He found out through Facebook when my birthday was, and he sent me flowers. I thanked him, but I started to get suspicious. His behavior was becoming alarming. He started complaining that all his wife wanted from him was his pain pills and money. Around this time, I met the man who would eventually become my husband, and of course, I announced it on Facebook. Robert went into a ballistic rage upon hearing this, saying that I should have known that he was in love with me. I told him, "You're married. Why are you in love with another woman?" He began texting me at least 10 to 20 times a day, going from calling me hateful names to profusely apologizing. I blocked his number, so he started blowing up my landline. Most of the time I kept it unplugged, so I didn't get most of the voicemails that he would leave. One day, out of curiosity, I did listen to some of the voicemails I got. In one of the messages, he claimed that I owed him $13,000. He then started making threats about how he would come to where I lived and would also pay my mother a visit. I blocked him on my landline and informed my mother about the situation. Robert got clever and started texting me from random numbers located all over California. He even sent letters to my home, and nothing he said in those letters made any sense. That's when I decided that I needed a restraining order. I tried twice through my county court, but since I lived in Washington State at the time, the judge wouldn't grant it since we lived in different states. Once Robert found out that I couldn't file a restraining order, he sent me more hateful messages and told me that I would never get rid of him. So I went back to court with the new messages. For this new hearing, Robert mailed in a letter of rebuttal. He claimed that he was a civil servant who had worked at a school district at one time and was an electrician by trade. He also said that he was on disability and couldn't drive longer for more than a half an hour without experiencing excruciating pain, and posed the question, how could he possibly come to Washington State? I told the judge that this wasn't true because he openly posted all day about his motorcycle trips to Malibu on Facebook. Regardless of the evidence, I wasn't granted a restraining order, and I felt failed by the system. I blocked him on all social media, emails, and phone numbers, but he obviously would still call using new numbers. He made a duplicate Facebook page with my profile picture and sent out friend requests to all of my friends. He had my real Facebook profile blocked, and I found out when a friend messaged me, "I got a friend request from you, but I already thought we were friends." My friend then told me that this fake profile of mine was making all kinds of posts talking shit about me. My friend reported it, and thankfully Facebook took it down. I changed my cell phone number, and I eventually moved into a new place. Things died down for a while, but Robert somehow found me on LinkedIn. After that, I straight up deleted LinkedIn and Facebook, and I saw that he even followed me on my YouTube page. I don't know how to remove someone, so I just blocked him there. To wrap up this insane story, I've included a couple of recordings of the messages he left.
Hey, I need you to unblock me and respond to me, please. Would you consider doing that? That's the Christian thing to do, don't you think? Please, I'm not playing around. Bye. Look, if you don't respond to me, you're not leaving me too many choices here, and there only leaves me one, and I don't want to do that, and I don't want to blindside you. I wish you would just talk to me. We could work this out, but obviously you don't want that. But you're not leaving me much of choice, and I won't be going after a paycheck. Bye.
Back in the day, I used to work at Sears. This is when they were doing really well and had tons of stores. If anybody doesn't remember Sears, they were a large department store that sold many things like appliances and clothes. It's mostly gone out of business in recent years though. But when I worked there, we would get lots of people in the store. Well, one time I was working a long day in December. With it being around Christmas time, there were lots of people shopping for gifts and stuff. It was also a weekend, so that added to it. I worked basically all day and I saw countless people. When I was finally off of work, I was happy to go home and was tired. So I just remember that I clocked out of work and then left the store. I went out to my car and then drove back home. It took maybe 15 minutes or so to get back. Then I parked my car in the driveway and got out of it. However, as I was walking up to my front door, I heard a car coming down the street, which was usually very quiet. I noticed it but didn't really think that much of it at all, and I kept going. However, as I was opening my door to go inside, I happened to hear the car slowing down. I looked over to see that the car was starting to pull over to the side of the street in front of my house. So I stopped and I kept watching it because I wanted to see what this car was doing. I did not recognize the car as a neighbor or anybody that I knew. The car pulled over and came to a stop just in front of my mailbox. Then the driver's window rolled down a little, and I saw somebody open up my mailbox and then put something inside of it. I couldn't really tell who the person was from where I was. I think it was a man, but I'm not 100% sure. Anyways, I didn't really know what this person was doing or what they had put in my mailbox. After that, they rolled their window back up and then they drove away. I went back outside, and after seeing that the car was out of my sight, I walked down to my mailbox. I opened it and I looked inside to see an unmarked envelope. I brought it inside. When I opened up the envelope, there were several Polaroid pictures in it. They were all pictures of me. The first were me working at Sears earlier that day when I was at the registers working as a cashier. I had not known that any of these photos were taken. They were taken at a distance too, so it was not obvious to me and I never noticed it. There was then a photo of me walking in the store, I think when I went on my break, and the last photo was of me walking out to my car in the parking lot after work. This was clearly taken from inside of a car that was also in the parking lot. I hadn't noticed any of them. Of course, I was very freaked out by this. I didn't know what to do about it or anything. I didn't go to the police or report it, but I did tell my friends as well as coworkers. They were all just as confused as I was. The rest of my time working at Sears, I didn't notice anything else like that, and I never saw that car at my house again. I'm not sure where the pictures are. I think I still have them somewhere, but I couldn't find them. It's been so long. But I'd still like to know why that person did that. Was it just an elaborate prank? Why would they choose me though? And they must have followed me home without me noticing. It's all very strange. Something weird happened to me last week. I was having a movie night by myself in my apartment. I live alone and on the second floor. My apartment building is fairly new, and I really like it. The place I live in has 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a living room and a kitchen. I was on my second movie of the night, and the time was about midnight. It was Saturday, so I didn't have work or anything the next morning. My apartment happened to be on the far end of the hallway, and it was right next to the stairs that people would occasionally use. The elevator was in the center of the hallway, which is much more common for people to use. I heard the door to the stairs open and then close. It sounded like somebody was walking by down the hallway, and I didn't think anything of it, but I realized soon that it sounded like more than one person, maybe almost 10. I thought it was a little weird, but expected them all to pass by. It seemed like they all stopped right outside of my doorway though. Maybe they were going to the place across the hall from me. The apartment across the hall though was not lined up with my door, but was a little ways down. I just got curious for some reason, so I paused the movie and got up. I walked over to the door and looked out the peephole. What I saw shocked me. There was like 10 guys standing in the hallway right outside my apartment, and they were all facing my door. I was instantly creeped out. I didn't know who any of these guys were, and they were all wearing all black and had hoods on, so I couldn't see much of their faces. This was really bizarre to say the least. Nobody had knocked on my door though, and it didn't seem as though they were going to. They were just standing there. I considered for only a second opening the door and asking what was going on, but I thought better of it. I quickly walked away and decided to just ignore them. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable as long as they were all standing there. I was hoping and sort of expecting them all to move along and to keep walking away down the hallway. I listened for them to move away, but they didn't. I waited for a little longer before unpausing the movie, but I still didn't hear them walking away. The guys had to all still be there. I tried to distract myself by watching the film, but in doing so, I turned the volume down significantly. I didn't want the people outside to hear or know that I was home. As the movie played though, I still couldn't focus. It wasn't helping to distract me from the strange men standing outside my door. Then, I heard what I was sure sounded like my doorknob turning. It was very quiet, and the only reason I had heard it was because number 1, I was already thinking about the guys at the door, and number 2, my TV volume was now very quiet. This made me feel really creeped out, even more than I already was. I also started to feel like possibly I was in danger. I stayed where I was, not sure of what to do. For the next probably 10 minutes, I didn't hear any other noises or anything. I got up to see if the men were gone, and I was really hoping that they were. When I got to the door and looked out though, they were all still there. I ran back as quietly as possible. I sat back down on my couch and had no clue what to do in this situation. I didn't think I could call the police for this. They were just standing in my hallway. Yes, I thought they tried opening my door, but it's not like they were trying over and over or banging on the door. Looking back, I probably should have, but I was just hoping I wouldn't have to. After maybe 5 more minutes or so, I went back to look again. This time, when I looked out, they were all gone. I couldn't believe it. I hadn't even heard them walking away or anything. I was so paranoid that I kept looking back out my peephole every 10 minutes or so. Luckily, I didn't see them. But before going to bed, I was so worried about it that I left my apartment and walked the hallways, just making sure that the men were gone. I went throughout the whole entire building just about without seeing them. After that, I was finally able to go to bed. By now, it was past 2 o'clock in the morning, and I was really tired. I fell asleep pretty quickly. However, at some point, I was woken up in the night. I just remember waking up to the sounds of somebody knocking on my front door. They knocked about 2 times after I woke up. I knew it was probably the same guys, and I was terrified. I stayed in my bed and didn't even bother to get up. What could I do? Then, there was just silence. I was afraid they would break in or something. I couldn't believe that they were back, if that's in fact who was at the door. I really didn't want to get up and check though. I laid there in my bed for the longest time. It was probably about 30 minutes or so. I finally looked at the clock and saw that it was almost 4 a.m. Then I got up and checked the door. Nobody was outside in the hallway though. Whoever had knocked was gone. I went back to sleep after that and heard nothing more. Since then, everything's been fine. This happened when I was in high school. It was the summertime, and I think that I was about 15 or so. So I was home alone because both my parents had work, and my older sister also worked. I was too young to have a job, so I just stayed home and played video games on most days. That's what I was doing on one morning when I heard a knock on the door. When I heard a knock on the front door. I never liked to answer the door. I didn't know who it was, but I figured it to be a salesman or something. I didn't even bother to get up. Whoever was at the door knocked again one more time. I just ignored it and kept playing video games. I hoped that they would go away, and after that second time, they stopped knocking. I figured that they were gone, so I never left my bedroom. So I continued gaming, and I quickly forgot about it. It was maybe 1 or 2 hours later when I heard a knocking at the front door again. I figured that the same person was back, but I still didn't know who it was. This time, though, I figured that I better get up and see. Plus, I was curious if they were going to be knocking on the door multiple times a day. So I left my bedroom and I walked over towards the door. I saw some random guy standing there, and I had no idea who he was, but I still didn't want to answer the door. He didn't seem to notice me, so I quickly went away. I went back to my bedroom and then just hoped that the guy would realize nobody was going to answer the door. I didn't know what he wanted, but I didn't really care either. The knocking stopped, and I figured that he was gone again. Moments later, the home phone rang. I didn't know if it would be my parents or something, so I got up to answer it. When I arrived at the phone, I picked it up and said hello. I heard a man's voice on the other end who I did not recognize. He said, "Answer the door," and then he hung up. I was really freaked out now. I went over to a window and looked out, and saw that that same man was still standing there. I figured he had to be the one who just called. This was really strange, but it didn't make me want to answer the door anymore. In fact, it made me want to answer the door even less. A lot less. I went back into my bedroom and tried to just ignore it all. After that, I didn't hear any more knocking. Sometime later, I got up and checked out the window again, and the guy was not there anymore. I was glad that he was gone and hoped that he wouldn't come back. For the rest of that day, there was no more knocking. Soon my sister and parents got home from their jobs. I remember that later that night, my parents and I were in the living room. My dad noticed out the window there was a car parked on the side of the street. It was across the street, but sort of in front of our house. It was really rare to see cars parked on the street like that in our neighborhood. My dad said to my mom how it was strange. Then I remembered everything that happened, and I told my parents about it. My dad decided to go and see the car. All the lights were off, and we couldn't tell if anybody was inside of it, but I think we all figured that it was vacant. So my dad left the house and went outside. When he did, he had made it no more than 10 steps into the yard when the car suddenly started up. Then it quickly pulled away, driving off. It was definitely very suspicious, all right. After that, there was never any more knocking on the door when I was home alone.